our next speaker is Kate Markey. She's the Managing Director of Can Invest, and they manage funds and do social impact consultancy, and they were the organisation that supported the generation of our report, The Landmark Difference. So without further ado, please welcome Kate to the stage.
Thank you, Andy. Dare I lose this piece of equipment? Thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's fantastic to have kind of live streaming as well to understand actually kind of who's out there. Looking forward to kind of receiving kind of the tweets of how the event goes on. I wanted to start today with a story, and it's a story that a social enterprise that we've worked with before told me. And it's a story that's important to me because actually for me it goes right to the heart of what we're talking about in terms of social value. So this social enterprise was doing some customer feedback on some of its services, and it interviewed, this is where the impact gets lost, isn't it? It interviewed this man, Fred. That's not actually Fred. Kind of obviously there are client confidentiality issues here, but you get the drift with the photograph. Fred is a 75-year-old Yorkshire gentleman, and a very proud man he is, and he uses their bus services, their community bus services in Bradford. So Fred was asked, why do you always use the 8:30 bus going into town, and actually why do you have a cup of coffee in the supermarket, but you don't shop in the supermarket, you finish your cup of coffee and you get back on the bus and go home? Fred said, well, it's because actually if I don't get home before 10:30, that's when all my home help services are live.
I could
and it's actually kind of, I don't need all of those services, but actually if I don't get home in time, I worry that actually I'll lose all of them. So actually kind of, Fred can actually go to the bank, he can go to the post office, he can do his own shopping, but actually he's frightened of losing the other services that he does need, so actually kind of the result is he spends just 2 hours out of the day, every day, and most of that is on the bus. Now for me actually kind of that sounds slightly farcical, that actually kind of an elderly but very able man has his time dictated by some services that actually kind of cannot be flexible around his needs. So for me, and actually for Fred, I would say actually kind of social value is probably actually services that are worked around him, services that actually enable him to maintain the things that we all cherish, which is self-respect, freedom and independence. But actually kind of unfortunately, no one had ever asked Fred those questions, and actually kind of the problem was that actually the services that had been procured, the contract was so restrictive that actually they couldn't have the flexibility that was required. That for me is actually kind of just ridiculous. But actually kind of for me, why does that example actually really inherently show the value of social value? Well, 3 things. Number 1, I won't be able to remember them all now, I've said 3. Number 1 is actually that if you ask the right question, it's about asking the right questions. It's not about asking the questions that you think might elicit the right answers. Number 2, actually also that social impact means different things to different people, or social value means different things to different people. And I have actually now forgotten the 3rd one. Hold on. And actually kind of it's around being people-centered, so actually putting the individuals at the heart of what we're trying to deliver. But obviously actually kind of in terms of, oh, this is great. Hold on. Can we go back? Oh. No. There's one missing, okay. So actually the concept of social value is obviously kind of not a new thing. For example, we've had social clauses in public sector commissioning for years, and actually also in terms of private companies with their corporate social responsibility programs, deploying both skills and time into local community projects. And also we've had trusts and foundations capitalising high impact community projects around the country. But actually kind of for me, what the absolute difference is now is actually the foundations on which actually that social value is created. If we don't get this right, actually we'll never begin to solve the problems. Actually, for me, it's also around, when we talk around social value, we're talking around social impact. Actually, social value for me indicates some kind of additionality. I think actually we have between all our services and our products the ability to deliver social impact inherently. It doesn't have to necessarily be something that's in addition. But actually, we need a cross-sector approach to this, as Matt has already said. Actually, we have inherent entrenched problems, social problems. We have some mistrust in terms of in certain sections of private sector companies, and actually, we have public purse costs that are spiraling out of control. We need to have a cross-sector response to this. Is this working? Is it working? So let me look at the case for this. In terms of kind of the public sector, we've mentioned already that actually kind of there have been public social clauses in the public sector commissioning for a while. But actually, kind of with the compulsory. Let me start again. Sorry. In the late 1990s, actually, kind of when we saw compulsory competitive tendering, actually, that was supposed to bring around greater efficiencies in how public services were delivered, and also around health. And actually, kind of what it did create was actually very bureaucratic structures, which meant that innovation and actually social impact went out of the window. Then we had the Best Value Act, which did actually widen the remit for commissioning, but still didn't actually incentivize commissioning for social value. Today, unfortunately, what we have is a real fear around next stage of budget cuts in terms of salami slicing, and actually the safer option, unfortunately, kind of is to manage risk by commissioning at scale, which actually is not always a bad thing, but actually rather than having the conversation about actually how do we commission for social value. It is working. Okay, so when we look at actually kind of the private sector, we have seen in recent decades that it is changing. That actually kind of the pursuit of profit maximization has meant that actually kind of there's always been an expected or normalized trade-off, and that trade-off often has been around societal benefits. The result of that, actually, if you've seen some parts of the private sector who've disconnected from the communities in which they operate. And actually kind of the result of that has been significant amounts of mistrust. So actually kind of what we're seeing now is companies wanting to reconnect with the communities to actually really evidence the incredibly valuable role they have in terms of job creation, innovation, and stimulating the economy. They're wanting to build trust. So what kind of new initiatives are we seeing there in terms of actually how companies want to be able to evidence their social value? Well, we're seeing things like ethics, which some of you will know here, and also things like the Social Stock Exchange. These are new initiatives which are platforms which allow private companies or publicly listed organisations to be able to disclose their social credentials, to be able to attract both retail and institutional investment. Is this working? So, what about the social sector? Well, the social sector actually has still its heartland is in public service, but actually kind of said that means that it, unfortunately kind of it has been been vulnerable to kind of the economic challenges as well. It's seeing falls in funding in terms of kind of donations, and also actually the different ways in which commissioning is happening in terms of public service. So actually things like payment by results, payment for success. Those are not new things for example, in sectors like international development, but they are in things like social and healthcare. That brings with it greater demands for transparency and actually how organisations are being able to evidence what they do in terms of impact and the real impact that they create. And that comes within a backdrop of an increased need for services, kind of things like debt counselling, around housing support services, around things like early intervention, often in places where there are significant wastelands, where actually kind of the third sector is actually kind of the only deliverer of social impact in that area. When I look at, did I do that or did you do that? When I look at CanInvest's activities and actually how do these actually feed into actually kind of transferable impact frameworks of how we work with organisations. The tenets and actually kind of how we build and work with organisations when we're helping them understand their social impact are these kind of, I guess, kind of three tenets. For us, it's around actually, we absolutely believe that when an organisation understands the impact that it has, then it has the ability to be able to influence and innovate kind of commissioners or funders or actually investors. It actually also puts you in a far strong position to be able to negotiate with those funders as well. We see it also in terms of actually kind of it makes commercial sense in terms of your strategy. So actually if you are building a strategy that puts impact first, inherently what you are doing is being able to deploy your resources, which actually are often kind of quite constrained, into areas actually kind of where you know you're going to have greatest impact. I'm actually not even touching this now, which is quite scary. What I thought was interesting is actually kind of how the commonality of what we do is transferable to what we're talking about today. So what do actually kind of in terms of investors, or whether we're looking at a commercial investment or social sector investment, and also commissioners, well, what do they share? Both of them are actually looking for investing for return, whether that's around reducing public purse or actually kind of looking to look at financial return. Both these are actually going to be able to assess risk and performance, and actually kind of what is the likelihood of that return, whether it be social value or whether it be financial. And actually both, increasingly, are looking for requiring a clear evidence base. So we've seen actually kind of the architecture of public services is rapidly changing, and actually we are the providers of this in the future. It is working? Yes. This is really kind of high level. When I look at the organisations that we invest in or the organisations that we provide support to, a lot of actually kind of what we look at here in terms of what is the beginning here of an impact plan is actually how, I think there are things here that are transferable in terms of actually how you might want to think about your strategy. So actually when we're looking at an organisation, is there a clear statement of intent about what they're doing? Well, this is the beginnings actually kind of an impact strategy of actually kind of what is the problem we are trying to solve. This is not actually now the vanguard of just the social sector. Actually, this makes commercial and social sense to all of us. Actually, kind of, is there a kind of a lockstep in actually terms of what we're trying to do? Are we contextualizing this in terms of kind of a market understanding? And actually, can we, if we're saying actually this is the evidence that we create, actually how are we making sure that that's going to happen? And this reporting and evaluation at the end is really important to me. Those who've heard me speak before will know I do have a habit of talking about good governance. If we say as organisations that actually kind of we have good impact, then actually how are we doing that? How are we reporting on that? And actually who in the organisation is being held to account in terms of actually whether that impact reporting is happening? And actually is it around our impact performance as much as our financial performance? I'm pointing it the wrong way. No, I'll go back. Thank you. So there actually kind of are some really, Matt touched on it before around transparency. And actually for me, we've talked around actually transparency, around trust, and also kind of knowledge sharing. For me, these are some really good examples of actually the kind of access to data that is out there. So the Global Value Exchange, or was previously known as WikiVoice, I'm glad they've changed the name because it was quite difficult to say. This is basically an open source platform where actually if you want to look at any kind of indicators or outcomes or actually stakeholder groups for any element of work that you want to do, actually you can not only contribute, you can look on here, but actually also you can contribute. And actually what it means is actually the users of this platform are actually the ones who become this creators of the knowledge. And actually this is the thing that's really interesting for me is around actually the whole democratization of impact, actually who owns impact. Late last year, I did some co-authored a piece of research with Big Society Capital and Baker Tilly, looking at the state of social impact measurement for social enterprises. And it was interesting actually where you saw who thought they owned the impact that was being created. And it's an interesting element of the debate where there'd been very active involvement of social investors, so where you've seen things like health or social impact bonds around social care or prison leavers. Actually kind of organisations felt, both commissioners, investors and also the social enterprises felt that impact was actually owned by the commissioners because the commissioners were the ones who were triggering the payments. But actually in other sectors where you haven't seen kind of the rise in social investment, actually you saw organisations say it's actually us that generate this impact, it's us that own this impact that happens in our local communities. And you're beginning to see actually this whole kind of democratisation, but actually who owns it ultimately. So the Housing Association Charitable Trust Hacked, they're doing a really interesting piece of work at the moment on kind of well-being. They're starting a kind of a well-being index, and actually it's particularly aimed at housing associations, but looking at actually how they can assess the value of how they work with their tenants. So for example, it might be They help a tenant move into a house. Their financial stability improves. What impact does that have? Engaged investment is an interesting one. They're building an index of actually social investment activity, and actually also Big Society Capital, the social investment wholesale bank, has developed an outcomes matrix where you can look at actually kind of what's impact is being had on individuals, on communities, on societies at large. I guess kind of the secret here is actually kind of these aren't actually kind of typically kind of for specialist organisations. Actually, we can all use these, and actually particularly around things like Big Society Capital, what they want to be able to create is a way in which individuals, social enterprises, charities, commissioners, investors are actually all looking at the same frameworks, actually and that's how you understand what does good look like, what does innovation look like, and actually using that framework to kind of build quality within the sector. So if I made a plea around this power of partnership based on transparency, based on trust, and based on knowledge sharing, then these are things that I would say. Actually, in terms of kind of public sector, I guess kind of the call to arms here is actually kind of look at actually kind of your peers in the sector who are doing some really interesting really interesting work in this space. So people like Knowsley Borough Council, who are taking a really high level approach to kind of looking at the Social Value Act and saying, okay, what is the key thing that is impacting on kind of our local area? For them, it's around youth unemployment and youth apprenticeship. They kind of see this kind of ticking time bomb of actually if they don't act. So actually, how are they going to build in that social need into everything that they procure? You look at someone like West Lindsey Council, a small district council in Lincolnshire that we work with. Very small council, but actually what they've been able to do is to set up a community enterprise fund. Actually, and what they do, when actually kind of we are working with them on that fund, we're managing the fund for them. Actually, and it's going to work. It's money there that is for local people to set up community-owned shops, pubs, services, etc. And actually bringing a fund manager like Can in, it means that we can leverage greater funds from a national funding perspective into that local area. Really, really visionary work that's going out on the ground. If you look at kind of the private sector, and it's already been touched on in terms of what Tim said, and Andy also, this is around supply chains. Actually, kind of it is not enough anymore to have traditional CSR policies. You know, kind of consumers and actually also investors, retail investors, will not look at just actually kind of your CSR agenda. Actually, kind of what they'll be looking at is whether or not you want to be held account for actually your behaviour as a business, what you say about your business, alongside actually potentially where you invest your capital. By capital, I mean kind of human otherwise as well. And then also actually for the social enterprise sector and for the charitable sector, the call to arms here is actually having a mission statement is no longer enough. Actually, the whole adage that actually kind of you can't measure love, which was a very kind of typical term for kind of traditional charities, it doesn't wash anymore. If you work for a social enterprise and charity and think actually kind of you are the vanguard of kind of social mission, you know, actually, and you don't think actually your private sector competitors are doing this better than you are, you're absolutely wrong because they are. They're, you know, organisations like Landmark who are thinking fantastically well about this space. So actually, the power of partnership, which is what we need in terms of cross-sector collaboration. Actually, for me, it's, you know, when we're doing innovation, it's around, are we trusting each other to come to the table? Are we being transparent enough with each other to come to the table, to understand what actually the mutual benefit is, and actually kind of what are we all doing at the table? But actually to be able to know that we can create social change together. When you're doing when you're doing innovation, actually the heavy lifting at the beginning is really, really difficult. Actually, how do you stack that up? Well, you stack it up through cross collaboration. And that's, you know, the power of that is around things like exploiting networks that you wouldn't previously have had. It's about sharing expertise, and it's also bringing that track record, because actually when you're doing innovation, it's the first time it's been done. Actually, kind of when you go to talk to commissioners, when you go to talk to potential investors, they will be looking for some element of a track record. We can have that track record together. So you are all here today because actually kind of either you're watching and listening, or you're here today because either, you know, on the very least, actually kind of you are interested in how you as organisations or individuals can operate in this space in terms of creating better social value, or actually kind of to the absolute best, you're a fully signed up member of actually kind of we need to do this together. When I think about actually kind of people like Fred, actually he doesn't see his community as a microcosm of private, public and third sector. He sees people and he sees communities, and actually what he is an active social citizen and actually a good ambassador for his area if actually kind of we will let him be that. Thank you.